from years ago. I don't know how many years ago. I was trying to find out, but I'm not sure. But it's just been updated, and I just thought it was where the Lord wanted us to go today. So today's lesson is called Loose Lips Sink Ships. Okay? Words are one of the most important forces that human beings have. Tools, whatever we want to call it here. Our words carry a lot of weight. And words have the power to help, heal, humble, harm, humiliate. Those are just the H's. You know, you could go on to another letter in the alphabet, and just words are just so important. And the words we choose play a big part in where we end up tomorrow. Okay? And, you know, just remember that our words begin as our what? Thoughts. And our thoughts are what's in our heart.
Yep.
Okay, and I want to say it was Proverbs 27. Oh, I'd have to get back to you on it. But anyway, we're going to go over a biblical example called of Michal. Now, remember, we've talked about her before, like, what is her name? How do you say her name? So I looked it up, and this man on there, I don't know who he is, but he told me how to say this. So, Michal. Yeah, isn't that? Michal. Instead, so you're not even saying that C there. So she's our biblical example today of loose lips sink ships. But there are more. And that's what I encourage you to do this week is to, turn your paper over and this week go through and find some of the other examples of people who had some loose lips and they sank their own ship. Okay? Because there are other examples. But today it's going to be Michal, and we're going to start by going on the back, looking at the background of Michal. So we're going to go to 1 Samuel 18. 1 Samuel 18. Sounds like everybody else is there but me. Okay, 1 Samuel 18. Verses 27 and 28. And I will go ahead and read that. Wherefore David arose and went, he and his men, and slew of the Philistines 200 men. And David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in full tale to the king, that he might be the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, to wife. So here we have, this is Saul's daughter, and we're going to go into chapter 19 starts where, and we've talked about this before and you've heard it in the preaching, Saul goes after David. He wants to kill him. But for now, in the chapter 18, Michal is Saul's daughter, and I think Saul might have asked for 100 foreskins, and he went out and did 200, which meant he had to slay those Philistines, so he did. And then Michal became David's wife, one of his wives. Okay, and then also the next bullet point, on the background of Michal is that Michal loved David. She did, and I think it's very important for us to let's go to chapter 19, and I'm going to read verses 9 through 18 because this is something that we want to keep in mind. Is that I really believe she truly loved David. Verse 9, and here we have Saul gets the evil spirit from the Lord. Verse 9, and the evil spirit from the Lord was upon Saul as he sat in his house with his javelin in his hand. Remember that Sunday school lesson I did when the javelin is aimed at your heart? Yeah. And the rest of that verse, as he sat in his house with his javelin in his hand, and David played with his hand. Verse 10, and Saul sought to smite David, even to the wall with the javelin, but he slipped away out of Saul's presence, and he smote the javelin into the wall. Saul wasn't kidding. And David fled and escaped into the night. Verse 11, Saul also sent messengers on David's house to watch him and to slay him in the morning. And Michal, David's wife, told him, saying, if thou save not thy life tonight, tomorrow thou shalt be slain. Verse 12, so Michal let David down through a window, and he went and fled and escaped. And Michal took an image and laid it in the bed, and put a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster and covered it with a cloth. And when Saul, remember Saul is her dad, okay? Keep that in mind. And when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, he is sick. Verse 15, and Saul sent the messengers again to see David, saying, bring him up to me in the bed, that I may slay him. And when the messengers were come in, behold, there was an image in the bed with a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster. Verse 17, and Saul said to Michal, why hast thou deceived me so, and sent away mine enemy, that he is escaped? And Michal answered Saul, he said unto me, let me go, why should I kill thee? Verse 18, so David fled and escaped, and came to Samuel to Ramah, and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and dwelt in Naioth. So here we see, Saul is serious about killing David, okay? It's not a game. It's not, just like, oh, I hate him and want him dead. No, an evil spirit from the Lord came over him, and he was after David, and David ends up on the run.
Do you know why the reason was that the Lord did that?
I don't, other than it being part of his plan, everything pointing back to him. But no, I actually don't know that right off the top of my head, Lisa. Sorry about that. So when Saul attempts to kill David, Michal saves him by deceiving his father's men. So she goes to great lengths. This is a woman who loves her man, okay? And just as we go through, and she is our example of loose lips sinking their own ships, it is important to be able to look back to this beginning part and to say, yes, she really did. She really did love him. And our intentions can be good in the beginning, okay? And that's kind of where we're headed there. So then David then goes on the run as Saul continues to hunt him down and kill him. And then keep in mind when David ran, because if he stays, Saul is going to kill him. I mean, he already proved it with the javelin. He's after him. So David takes off. David and his men, they take off. And David has to leave Michal behind, okay, and his other wives. Okay? So it's important to remember that she gets left behind. She did help him escape because she loves him. But David, in order to preserve his life, he goes on the run. And then, however, while he's on the road, David finds time to marry 2 more wives while he's on the run, okay? And that would be Abigail and Ahinoam, and I think word got back to, news travels, and I think that that Michal did not get word of that. That's just my own personal opinion. It doesn't tell us that. But then Saul gives Michal to another man while David's gone. While David's on the run, and he's picking up wives, okay, her dad gives Michal to another man, Phalti, to marry. And I always find this very interesting. Let's go to 1 Samuel 25. 1 Samuel 25, verses 42 to 44. And verse 42 says, and Abigail hasted and arose, okay, and just to give you the background, her husband was Nabal, okay, and Nabal was not a good man, and you can read over verse 25, or chapter 25, and get a little background on that. But on 42, Abigail hasted and arose and rode upon an ass with 5 damsels of hers that went after her. And she went after the messengers of David, and she became David's wife. And then verse 43, and David took Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they were also both of them his wives. Okay, verse 44, but Saul had given Michal, his daughter, David's wife, to Phalti, the son of Laish, which was Galem. Okay, so we just see things are very much out of order here. Okay. David's on the run. David's going to be the anointed king of Israel, okay? And Saul's after him to kill him. And then his daughter helps David, her husband, escape, okay? And so then Saul chases after him. And then so in some ways, I think Saul was just getting at David by doing this. You know, I don't necessarily think it was because he felt bad that Michal was alone. I think more of it was just vengeance vengeance towards David. So just could have been some.
I'm not sure, but you can confirm it. Back in whenever Saul let Michal be his wife,
Mm-hmm.
didn't he also think, oh, I'll give her to him to snag him or something? It's just something about that.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly.
It's such an interesting story with so many layers of it, and she's just not somebody that's mentioned a whole lot, but there is a very big lesson to learn from her. So David continues to be on the run here, and then we're not going to read it, but in chapter 31 of 1 Samuel, Saul dies and David becomes king of Judah. Okay. Which is, what Saul was afraid of the whole time, but it was ordained of the Lord. And so David does become king. So then, if we go to 2 Samuel chapter 3, we're going to see where David sends messengers to Ishbosheth to retrieve Michal. Okay? So in this, keep in mind, too, that David doesn't forget his wife. Okay? I know he's got other wives, and it just was very different back then than it is now. But just keep this in mind. These are important points, I think, to keep in mind in this lesson, is that Michal loved David. Okay? She hid him from her father. She saved his life. And then she ends up getting married off by her father to another man. But when David becomes king, he didn't just say, oh, well, let's let her stay where she is. I'm sure she's happy. He didn't do that. And I like to think, I know some of it's the pride thing. That's my wife, and you're not going to give my wife to another man kind of thing. But in my heart, I like to think that there was love there too. So it doesn't necessarily say that, but I think both of those things together. And then, so in chapter 3, verses 13 to 16, verse 13 says, and he said, well, I will make a league with thee, but one thing I require of thee, this is David, that is, thou shalt not see my face, except thou first bring Michal, Saul's daughter, when thou comest to see my face. And David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, deliver me my wife Michal, which I espoused to me for 100 foreskins of the Philistines. And Ishbosheth, in verse 15, and Ishbosheth sent and took her from her husband, even from Phaltiel, the son of Laish. Ugh, this next verse just gets me. As I said, there's so many layers to this story. Verse 16, and her husband, talking about Phaltiel, and her husband went with her along, weeping behind her to Bahurim. Then said Abner unto him, go, return. And he returned. His heart was broke, okay? That was his wife. Saul had given Michal to him, and so he loved her. And, again, just so many layers, so many people affected. It's a good lesson in how our decisions affect other people, So keep in mind that Michal is taken from Phalti, and he follows weeping until he's sent home. He's told, just stop. It's not going to do any good. Just stop and go home. She's not yours anymore. Just total craziness. So then David, okay, and all this background is very important here. David then becomes king of all Israel. And we're going to go to 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 3 to 5. So all the elders of Israel came to the king to Hebron, and King David made a league with them in Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. In Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem he reigned 30 and 3 years over all Israel and Judah. So he is now king like he was supposed to be. He was ordained to be. That is what God had for him. Jerusalem is conquered and is called the city of David. And now David now takes more wives and more concubines from Jerusalem. Okay? So we have the wives and we have the concubines. And then in chapter 6, David attempts to move the ark back to Jerusalem in chapter 6. And I encourage you to go back. There's, when I just tell you where the chapter is, to go back and read it as you have time. Because the points in chapter 6 are Uzziah attempts to steady the ark when it was shaken by the ox. He reaches out. Okay, they're moving the ark back to Jerusalem. And Uzziah is on the side, and the ark, it was shaken by the oxen, and without thinking, he just reaches out to steady it. And you might think, well, that's not such a bad thing. Well, you weren't supposed to touch the ark. Okay? And, a good lesson here is, again, our intents might be good sometimes, but we have to obey God. Okay? Obedience to God is always the most important thing. And so God killed him. David backs off, and he's like, whoa. And he leaves the ark there in the house of Obed-Edom for 3 months. Kind of because he's like, well, after that happened, let's just leave it right there where it is. But the thing is that in 3 months, they come and tell David, they're like, wow, you would not believe, and this is all in chapter 6, you would not believe how much God is blessing the house of Obed-Edom because the ark is there. So what do you think David wanted to do? He wanted to be blessed too. And he's like, well, we got to bring it back. We just need to do it the right way. And they did. Again, read chapter 6. So now we're going to read about Michal one final time. Let's go to 2 Samuel 6:14 to 23. And this is our focus today. But it's very important to get all that backdrop on it. And David danced. I'm going to go back to 12. And it was told King David, saying, the Lord hath blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that pertaineth unto him, because of the ark of God. So David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom into the city of David with gladness. Verse 13, and it was so that he's doing it the right way now. It was so that when they that bare the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces, he sacrificed oxen and fatlings. David was going to make sure not only did they not touch it, but that they were sacrificing, and he just wanted to do things the best he could and just get that ark back to Jerusalem. And David danced, verse 14, David danced before the Lord with all his might. And David, where am I reading to? Verse 23. And David danced before the Lord with all his might. David was girded with a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. Verse 16, and as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, okay, pay attention here, Michal, Saul's daughter, looked through a window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord. This is so sad, this next part. And she despised him in her heart. And then verse 17, and they brought in the ark of the Lord, set it in his place in the midst of the tabernacle that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And as soon as David had made an end of the burnt offerings and peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts. And he dwelt among all the people, even among the whole multitude of Israel, as well to the women as men, to everyone a cake of bread and a good piece of flesh and a flagon of wine. So all the people departed, every one to his house. Verse 20, then David returned. It's a time of celebration. David returned to bless his household. And Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David. Loose lips sink ships. And said, How glorious was the king of Israel today, who uncovered himself today in the eyes of the handmaids of his servants, as one of the vain fellows shamelessly uncovereth himself. 21. And David said to Michal, it was before the Lord which chose me before thy father, and before all his house, to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord, over Israel. Therefore will I play before the Lord. Verse 22, and I will be yet more vile than thus, and will be base in mine own sight, and of the maidservants which thou hast spoken of them shall I be had in honor. Verse 23, therefore Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child unto the day of her death. Did you go catch that? Okay, so we see this background of Michal and David getting married, and I do believe there was love, I think, on both their parts. But we can see Michal would not, if she despised David back then, she wouldn't have saved his life, okay? When Saul was trying, she just would have, said, he's in here, and not helped him escape. But she did help him escape, because I do believe there was the love there. But from the time, through all those things that we read about before, and as things transpired, him leaving, David being on the run, she had her insane dad in her ear all the time. Be careful who you give your ear to. But this was her dad, and then her dad gives her to Phalti to marry, okay? And then David, after taking a few more wives, says, I want Michal back, okay? Let's hope it's for love, but I also do believe there was that kingly pride in there. That was, in a way, Michal was his. And so then she's taking from Phalti, who obviously loved her, and it's hard to believe that Michal didn't have some kind of love for a man that loved her like that. Again, so many layers, such craziness. But Michal was a hurt woman who let her bitterness eat her up, okay? She said some pretty terrible things to David here. Remember, David is king. David is still king to her, too, okay? Well, she has to remember that. And also, that's her husband, But she spoke what was in her heart. And I put here, and we can go there, Luke 6:45 real quick. Because it's a pretty important verse for us to remember. Luke 6:45. Tiff, would you read that when you get there?
A good man out of the good treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is good, and an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is evil. For of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaketh.
What's in our heart's going to come out our mouth, okay? And Michal had let bitterness crept in, and I'm not even saying that she didn't have reason. But I'm saying we have got to be so careful what comes out our mouth, because her loose lips did sink her ship. And many times in our life, we may feel like we're justified in how we feel and the things we say, okay? But remember, words cannot be taken back, okay? And we do not need to say everything that we think. And Paul said, all things are lawful, but all things are not expedient. Okay, meaning that even though sometimes things are right, it may not be the right thing to say. Okay, but I'm showing you here a woman who's been through a lot, but, okay, the king, her husband, brought her back. Okay? And as hard as it is, as much as she's been through, she really did have loose lips when she said what she did to him. So let's go back to 2 Samuel 6:14 through 23. I just want to go over that. She was saying what was in her heart. It was the abundance of her heart. And I'm not saying that our feelings are always wrong. I am saying that sometimes we need to get our feelings in check. And we always need to evaluate before we speak. And that's something that I feel like as women, men do too, but this is a ladies' class, we often have trouble with. Sometimes we speak before we think, and definitely before we pray over things. Okay? Let's see here, 2 Samuel 6. If you find the verse where she says that, it's got to be towards the end.
20.
Then David, thank you, Tiff. Then David returned to bless his household, and Michal, the daughter of Saul, but also say, still the wife of the king, still the wife of David, came out to meet David, her husband, the king, and said, and she said this mockingly, you can just hear this, how glorious was the king of Israel today, who uncovered himself today in the eyes of the handmaids of his servant, as one of the vain fellows shamelessly uncovereth himself. Now, David was leaping, and he was very excited for the ark to be back where it belonged. Okay, very excitement. I don't think he wasn't doing anything wrong. I think this is a bitter, hurt woman. Okay, and no matter what he was doing out there, she's angry. She's angry and she's bitter, and she spouted off at the mouth. Okay? This is so important, and it doesn't just apply to your spouse. Okay? Some spouses have gone on to heaven, some we don't no longer have with us. It applies to all areas of our life. We have got to be careful what comes out our mouth. Okay? We need to think before we speak. But to those ladies where you do have your husband still with you, remember, he is your husband and he is your covering. Remember the umbrella lesson? Okay? He is your covering, and then God over him. And we have got to be careful what we say. Okay? We're not doormats. And that is not, I've never taught that way, because I don't believe that's not what God teaches. Okay? Women are very special to the man and to the husband, and we're to reverence him. We're to reverence our husband. And I can tell you that I used to be the Michal. Sad. I used to be the Michal that spouted off at her husband. How wrong is that? It was before I was saved and gave my life to the Lord, but it's still not an excuse. And even Christian ladies, as Christian ladies, we have to watch ourselves to do that. But we should be reverencing our husbands, and he's not always going to make the wisest decision. Like I said, she found fault in what he was doing. I don't believe there was any fault to be found there. I believe he was honestly praising the Lord, and nothing was done in an impure or bad way. He was rejoicing. But she was kind of a scorned woman, and she'd been hurt. Again, I don't take away from any that we read before that she didn't have it easy. There were things in her life that were hard, okay? But it doesn't make what she said okay, okay? And words can't be taken back. We can say, I'm sorry. She could say she was sorry to David later, but that was done, okay? That was a done deal. And therefore, Michal, in verse 23, the daughter of Saul, had no child unto the day of her death, okay? She paid a big price. Loose lips, she sank her ship. So what the whole point of this lesson today is that, and again, not just for ladies with their husbands here, this applies to everybody in our life. We need to watch the things that we say, okay? Even though someone may say, well, it comes from a place of hurt. You know, I've been deeply wounded. I get it. But you know what? cast your burden and cares upon the Lord. Let him take care of it, because that doesn't make it okay for us to say whatever we think. And we're very good at excusing the wrong things we say. I know I have been before, where I've been like, well, they deserved it, or, I just need to get that off my chest, or, you fill in the blank, something that you've said. It doesn't make it okay. And this is not something that we hear a lot about. The big thing is, you have every right to be heard. You have every right to voice what you think, okay? The way that God has set it up, the children, then the wife, then the husband, then God, okay? And we give an answer to our husbands, those of us that have our husbands there. And guess what? If you don't have your husband there, you actually fall under the umbrella of your pastor, okay? And not to say that you do everything he says and stuff, but when you have needs, concerns, that kind of thing, need guidance, go to your pastor. And I would say this if he wasn't my husband, okay? God's given him as your umbrella, those of you without your husbands here. And so, too many times, just a side note, women do not utilize that. They don't ever go to their pastor and say, you know what, I'm struggling with this. You know what, I need to make this decision and I don't know what to do. That is what your pastor's for. And those of us with our husbands, that's what our husband's for, okay? And we go to our husbands, and maybe sometimes husband and wife need to go to pastor and say, we're really struggling with this. And maybe it is because, and I've been in this spot where we've been in counseling where I didn't completely understand my husband's decision. And so I was struggling with it. And so we went into counsel about it. And the bottom line was, and the pastor told me this, you're to submit to your husband. You've told him how you feel. And now your job is to stand back and allow the Lord to work in his heart as you pray for him, and you're to submit. It didn't mean I left counseling agreeing. It didn't. But I prayed to the Lord, Lord, please help me to submit the way I'm supposed to. Help me. You give Jim wisdom. You give I was calling pastor for y'all's sake. You give him wisdom and just help me to follow, okay? And it's amazing the work that God does when we do that, rather than seeing the example here of me getting it off my chest. A pastor's wife once told me, right time, right attitude, and right place. And there's so much truth in that, okay? My husband should always want to listen to what I have to say. We're partners, okay? He is my head, he is my covering, but there is value in what I say and what I bring to the table. And that's because that's the way the Lord made it. And we're to be a helpmeet to him. And he understands that. But we have to understand our job is to submit. And I just want to encourage you, never spout off at the mouth. Pray before you speak. Think before you speak. And that's to anybody, just so that you do not have loose lips. Loose lips are ones that just say whatever they want. And it's not beneficial. It wasn't beneficial to Michal. And she learned a very hard lesson, okay? I know she had pain. I know it. But I also know that her husband brought her back. The king brought her back. And things may not have been just the way she wanted. And what she needed to do is spend time at the feet of Jesus. That's what I need to do too. I need to spend time at the feet of Jesus so that my lips aren't loose, so that I don't say whatever comes into my... It may have felt good at the moment for her to say what it was, but she paid for it the rest of her life. David never went into her again. So if she thought she was lonely and hurting before, after that she really was. I wonder what Michal's life would have been like had she not said what she did. I wonder what our life would be like if we didn't sink our ship with loose lips so often. Okay? Proverbs 17:28, we won't turn there, but it's right there on the paper. Even a fool, when he holdeth his peace, is counted wise. We do not need to say everything that we're thinking, because sometimes as women, we do think more emotionally than men, for the most part. I know there are some men, but for the most part, we are emotional thinkers. And I have been an emotional talker and later regretted what I said. Okay? So let's not be that. Let's not have those loose lips. I learned from that young man, Bob, years and years ago, silence is okay. He was a young man that used to come over and hang out over our house and say nothing. I mean, he was like 19 or 20.
Uncle Bob.
And it was so uncomfortable. I'm like, I thought I had to do all the talking. But God taught me a very valuable lesson through that. You don't have to talk. And I always say that's a sign of good friendship too, is when you can be with somebody and you don't have to fill every moment with talking. Because in the Bible says, in the multitude of words there wanteth not sin. And that's one of those verses there. You know, we don't have to fill every moment. It's okay. And it's more than okay, because if Michal would have just not had loose lips, zipped up her lips, and taken it to the Lord in prayer and saying, I don't understand what's going on here. I'm hurting. Okay? She would have had a husband in every sense for the rest of her days. But instead, her loose lips sank her ship. I don't want to sink my ship. In fact, I want things to be the best that they can be. And that requires me depending on the Lord for everything, including my tongue. And James talks a lot about, there's verses there. Please, please, please go home and read these verses and understand the power that we hold in our words. Okay? All right. Thank you to our online friends for joining us.